I am Dr. Owiny, new faculty here at Trinity in the Division of Education. Came here from Lexington, Kentucky, the South, where it's warm. So thank you very much for indoctrinating us in polar vortex. That was not in my vocabulary 9 months ago. So thank you very much. If we have another one, I'm going back, just so you know. So pray that that doesn't happen. So I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful to be at Trinity. You all are amazing. I brag all the time to my other colleagues around the country that we kind of have the best students. Yeah? Yeah. So I'm very, very grateful to be here on campus and grateful to be here today. I was asked to speak on the integration of faith and vocation and what that might look like. As a teacher, what does that look like? So there are several directions I could have taken. I've chosen to go a little more of a practical direction in sharing what I know through my testimony. So to give you a little bit of background of where I came from and how I became a teacher, I often say that I got my calling and my salvation simultaneously. And here's how it went. I was sitting in church one Sunday, 9 years old, and a missionary family from Colombia was there. And the lady, Lucy, was speaking in our Sunday school class about her ministry in Colombia. And she was sharing that she would often make cookies for the school children as they would walk home from school. And their home was on a corner, and the school was just kind of behind their house, down the street a little bit. And often the children would walk past their house, past their gate, and she was trying to think of a way that she could just get to know the children, get to know their families. So she would bake cookies and then pass those out to the children and talk with them as they would walk by her home. And I thought, ooh, I want to go to another country and bake cookies and share them with kids. Remember, I'm 9. And I'm a child myself. And I'm thinking, that would be really awesome if I could do that. And so later on, we're in the church service, and her husband, Chuck, was speaking. And as he was talking, remember, I'm 9. And I just turned off. There we go. And it dawned on me that in order to go to another country, to bake cookies and share with the children about Jesus, I needed Jesus. So at that point, I asked the Lord into my heart in that rural Pennsylvania town, little Methodist church. And at the same time, I believe the Lord gave me a call to ministry. And at the time, I thought it was baking cookies for children in a third world country. Definitely the Lord has refined that and changed that. So he's been very gracious in directing me in how to use my gifts and talents for him and led me into teaching. And originally, I thought I would be in a third world country teaching at a missionary's kids' school or something. And he led me to an inner city school in Lexington, Kentucky. And that's the focus of today. I spent 13 years in the elementary schools in Lexington. 11 of those were in inner city schools, high rates of poverty, high rates of single-parent homes, mainly moms. So as we think about vocation and how that integrates with our faith, that's my focus today, is how the Lord grew me into using my faith in a secular setting. And what does that look like? It looks different for all of us depending on our vocation and where we are with the Lord. And the integration of faith with our vocation is a journey. We never really arrive, but we get better as we get closer to the Lord and understand more what it means to integrate our faith. So when I first started, this wasn't even on my radar. I just wanted to figure out how to be a teacher. Like, how do I teach science and reading and do all the paperwork and figure all of that out? But then as I grew in my career, in my profession, I started thinking about, I'm a Christian in a secular setting. There's lots of darkness around me. How can I be a light in this profound darkness? I'm working with students who are in the muck and mire of the grossness of humanity. What can I do to alleviate some of that pain and bring light to the darkness? And as I reflected for preparation for today, I was reminded of Henry Blackaby in Experiencing God, where he suggests that we think about ministry not as us going and doing God's work, because God's already at work around the world, but rather we find out what God is doing, and then we partner with him in what he's already doing. And that had a profound effect on me in my teaching, because God was at work in the inner city of Lexington. I just wasn't aware of it until I started looking for it. So I would encourage us all, as we think about our profession or our future profession, how can God use me in that? How can I go to where God is already working and be a part of working with him? So that's our focus for today. The verse that I thought would sum up my public school teaching is Micah 6:8. Micah was writing to Israel in extreme wealth, and yet they were forgetting to take care of the poor and the widows. So I think that this verse, as it was thousands of years ago, is applicable to us, because many times in our wealth, whether it's monetary or otherwise, we forget who we should take care of. And in my teaching, the Lord molded me into wanting to take care of the marginalized in our society, the inner city kids who came from parents who are prostitutes, pimps, drug dealers, gang members, in jail, not holding steady jobs, dropouts. Those were my students. So in that, how can I take care of the marginalized in our society? Micah 6:8 gives us some direction in that. So 3 points I want to leave you with today and discuss with you. And when you leave today, I hope that you'll remember the 3 requirements that Micah admonishes Israel to go and do, and that we can think about that in terms of vocation in our faith. So first, to act justly. What does that mean? Acting justly can be described as doing right to all, to do what is right in God's sight, to honor him, and this is my favorite, to do what is right, not to do what is wrong. Because many of us can say, well, I don't, and then we have our list of things that we don't do that are wrong. But do we do what is right in replace of doing nothing? I heard a speaker give an example of his son coming home from school and said, Dad, there were these kids that were picking on this other kid today, but I did not pick on him. His dad said, well, that's good. I'm glad that you didn't do that. But what did you do instead? I just walked away. I just didn't have any part of it. And his dad said, but what about the kid who was being picked on? Who stood up for him? Who was a friend to him? You did not do what was wrong, but did you do what was right? So as I think about my teaching experiences, I didn't realize it at the time, but that's a bit of the philosophy I was working from. The children I worked with were the forgotten. Very few of them expected to be any more than what their parents were, if they even knew who both of their parents were. Many felt like, well, I'll be a dropout at age 16 and I'll become a mom. I'll get pregnant and be a mom. Or I'll just drop out and, peddle drugs on the street to make a living. Or I'll just get a welfare check. Many people exacerbated that belief in our city. Myself and other colleagues believed differently. We believed that we could change the course of some of those students' lives by being faithful to the calling as teachers that we were given. And I took that a step further. I'm not only having to be faithful to the calling of a teacher, but I have to be faithful to the calling that the Lord has given me. So how do I integrate those 2 concepts in a secular setting? Well, for one, I had to be faithful and show integrity in making sure I taught the curriculum. had to make sure I was doing my best to teach my students how to read, which I believe would open many more doors for them than not being able to read. But it was more than that. So what did it mean to do what is right and not just not do what was wrong? Well, at a very simple level, it meant learning not to give in to the snarky comments in the teacher's lounge and giving in to those self-proclaimed prophecies. Well, that kid will never amount to anything. Look at, there's 5 kids in that family. They're all drug addicts. They're all, good for nothings. It was learning to not give in to that and to believe that my students could be different than their families. There was a lot of shalom not yet in my school, but there was a lot of shalom already. There were students who knew that they could do better than what they'd been born into, and they wanted someone to help them. There were students who worked hard and understood that they had potential beyond pimps and drug dealers, and they wanted that. So what could I do to help in that? One student said that she remembers me not allowing them to say, "I can't." A simple learning to change a 2-word phrase into "I can't" to "I'll try" had a profound effect on her. I believed inherently that with Christ, all things are possible. When I first started my teaching career, I never thought that that principle could have any application to my teaching. But it did, because in my teaching my students to not say "I can't," but say "I'll try," that changed the course of her life, she told me. I remember taking her to a basketball game. She loved basketball, and I remember taking her she's African American, and I had an African American coach when I played basketball at Asbury. And so I asked her one day, "Would you like to go to a basketball game?" She said, "Yes, I'd love to go." So I took her to the game. She was a 2nd grader, and she got to meet the coach, got to meet the players, and she later told me that learning to say "I will try" instead of "I can't," and seeing what other girls could do in college made an impact on her. She's now in an internship. I think she must be a junior or a senior at the University of Kentucky. She's in an internship in business. And she told me via Facebook that it was because she's there in part because she learned to say "I will try" in my class in 2nd grade rather than "I can't." And she learned that she could, as a girl in poverty with a single mom, go to college and do something beyond the struggle that they went through every day as she was growing up. That's doing what is right instead of just not doing what is wrong. Not doing what is wrong. One student, same class actually, ironically, she became a teen mom at age 17. And yet worked hard to complete her high school requirements. She's now going to community college to get her degree in, any guesses? Education. And her mom and her both say that my influence on her, noting that she appreciated my faith and knows that my faith is what made me the teacher I was. That was profound to me. The fact that I never explicitly shared Christ in my classroom because I couldn't, but I trusted the Holy Spirit to work through me to show others who I was, came through. That was so encouraging. But she said that she knew that my faith was what made me the teacher that I was, and that because of my influence on her daughter, she worked her way to go to college. And in fact, I talked with her in December when I was back in Lexington, and she said that she wouldn't be able to go back to school this semester because something happened with her financial aid, And she said, she looked at her mom and she said, but I told my mom that I have to go back or otherwise you would be disappointed in me. And I thought, wow, we have no idea the impact that we can have on people's lives by just being faithful to the call that Christ has put on us and showing integrity in our vocation. By me going to work every day, the year that she was in second grade, and doing my job the best that I knew how to do, and believe me, I messed it up a lot. But trusting the Lord and allowing him to work through me got her to a point where she recognized that she could have options and that she could better herself. So she's working toward going back to school to become a teacher. So act justly. Do what is right, not just what is not wrong. Speak up. Don't remain silent. Advocate for what is right, while also abstaining from what you know is wrong. Our faith becomes the standard by which we respond, not just in our social lives, but in our profession. So first, Micah admonished Israel to act justly, and I think the same applies to us today. But he also said to love mercy. Love mercy, not just like it, not just deal with it, but love mercy. Mercy is treating people the way Jesus treats us. It means to be glad of an opportunity to do good and to do it cheerfully. It's an act of kindness, compassion, something that gives evidence of divine favor, a blessing. So often we're bent more toward justice than mercy. And believe me, in my teaching, there were times that I would have much rather delved out some justice than to give out some mercy. But when I thought about it, it wasn't my students who needed the justice, in my mind. It was their parents. And if I delved out justice, would that do any good? So I have to choose mercy. How do I show mercy? Well, I taught not that long ago, but in the days before social justice issues were really a hot topic. But as teachers, we knew there were injustices in our students' lives. We couldn't do much to fix those things, but we could show mercy to our students. Our students were more victims of injustices than they were perpetrators of it. So we worked to give them knowledge, as prescribed by the curriculum, but we also worked to give them knowledge and skills outside the curriculum that we knew would help them succeed. There was a student that I had one year who, very sweet, male, wanted to please, he wanted to do well. You could just see the potential in him. But he often missed school. And so I went to the social worker one day and asked her, what in the world can we do to help this child be in school? He's got potential, he's a really good kid, smart, but he's not doing well because he's not here. What do we do? And she said, well, do you know his story? And I said, well, I know he lives in the projects down the street. That's really all I know. I haven't been able to get mom to come in. I don't really know a whole lot about him. She said, well, his mom's a prostitute. So after this conversation with her, I thought, okay, so what does that mean? So over the course of a few weeks, I learned why he wasn't coming to school. His mom was working in their 2-bedroom apartment in the projects, of course, at night. So cardboard, walls, very thin walls, 2-bedroom apartment. He and his 3 siblings were sleeping in the bedroom next to where his mom was working. They weren't getting much sleep. Then his mom would go to sleep after she was done working that night, around 6, about the time they're supposed to be getting up, getting ready for school. So they would miss getting up to come to school, or they would be late coming to school because there wasn't anyone in the home to wake them up. So we definitely could have done some justice, we did to some degree. We called social services and we tried to get some of those services in place. but I also chose to show mercy to him. And in thinking about how to integrate my faith into my profession, I oftentimes wasn't really sure what that should look like, but I knew that I could do practical things. And as I realized, there is profoundness in the mundane. There's profoundness in the everyday activities that we go through. And for this child, mercy was getting him an alarm clock and teaching him how to use it. We created a little card of what I would teach my children when I had them, of what to do when they go to bed. And I even put in there, say your prayers. And I just taught it. I said, just when you go to sleep, just thank Jesus for your day. Thank him for your family. Thank him for the food that you had that day. And then go to sleep. And so he used that alarm clock. And as a second grader, he woke up his kindergarten sister and his preschool brother and got them ready and brought them to school. Another student was a child of 9 other children. His dad worked at a horse farm, and they lived in a trailer. So imagine 10 children, 2 parents in a trailer. Obviously, very few opportunities for these children. Well, he was in my class one year, and we had a program at our school where students who had perfect attendance during the quarter received a coupon to Fazoli's, a fast food Italian restaurant. So they could get a free kids meal by having perfect attendance. As second graders, that's pretty cool, right? Well, it's cool when you can go. Not so great when you can't get there. So I made it my practice to know which students would be able to get there and which parents would take them and which parents might not be able to take them. And this is a child who wouldn't be able to go. So I picked him up at his house one Saturday. Fazoli's was only about 3 miles from his house, but he'd never been that far south in the city. I'm still amazed at his reaction as we were driving to Fazoli's. We passed the mall, the big mall in central Kentucky, and he couldn't believe how large the building was and how many cars were in the parking lot. And afterwards, he said, "Thank you so much, Mrs. Owyn. I've never had a meal at a restaurant before." And I thought, oh my word. This is a life experience that many of us take for granted. And all I did was just give what I had and gave him an opportunity to experience something that he'd never experienced before. How many of us go out to eat many times a week, run through a drive-through, and he had never been out to a restaurant? So in this thought of how do I love mercy? How do I serve the Lord in a public school and show mercy? There were many ways that we did, and I've given you some examples. I was known to buy shoes for my students, take food to their homes. I took one mom to the doctor. She had a pretty serious diagnosis and really needed to make regular appointments, keep her appointments, and she couldn't always. So I took her one time to make sure that she had the follow-up that she needed. And it was in those tangible ways that allowed me to show Christ through my teaching. So as you can see, teaching isn't just about academics. It's much more than that. It's acting justly, loving mercy, and then walking humbly with your God. What does that mean? Walking humbly with your God. I think that Micah may have gotten the order of this wrong. I've thought, of course he didn't, but I often think, how do you act justly and love mercy and then walk humbly with your God? In my mind, I was thinking this is a list that you go down. And as I've pondered this, I think it's a cyclical cycle. You're constantly doing all 3 of these things in a circular motion. It's not a list of things to check up. Well, I acted justly today, tick. I loved mercy today, tick. Oh, I've walked humbly with God today, tick, done. Let's move on to the next list. This is a constant pattern that should be reflected in our lives. So I heard a pastor recently speaking on Micah 6:8, and he defined walking humbly with your God as existing to glorify him, to make him look good. And I thought, I've got to speak in chapel in a few weeks on this topic of faith integration in vocation. How do we make God look good in a secular workplace? How do we make God look good in a Christian workplace? How did I make God look good in my public school? Well, for me, it meant supporting my students and my colleagues in practical ways. It was going to a parent's house after she lost her child, my student, to a drunk driving accident. It was hugging her and letting her cry, going to the funeral, and praying with her. How do we make him look good? It's going the extra mile. It's going to the home where the smell of alcohol and weed is so strong, it knocks you over as you open the front door. But you know you need to enter that house in order to get a signature on a form so your student can be tested for a disability so you can provide him with the services he needs to succeed. It's writing sub-plans for a colleague who had emergency surgery and she couldn't do it, and she was worried about it and wanted to make sure her students were taken care of while she recovered. It's having a Bible on your desk that's not open during class, but sought out during lunch and planning time in the quiet moments when students aren't in their room. It's that very Bible being visible that allows students to know what you believe when you can't say it. It's a student knowing you're a believer because of that Bible and your actions every day that prompt her to ask you to pray for her unborn brother, whose ultrasound showed that he had a birth defect that wouldn't live past birth. It's praying with her as the students enter the classroom and letting her sob on your shoulder. And then the next school year, 6 months later, finding out that he was born healthy. What does it mean to walk humbly with your God in a public school? It means allowing him to work in the very thing you didn't see coming. And the student who asks, what's baptism, when you're reading a book that has a baptism in it, that wasn't a Christian book. And it's allowing that student to share with the class, another student to share with the class what baptism is. And getting your Bible off your desk and looking at the scriptures that he learned in an after-school program about baptism. Walking humbly with your God means knowing that you on your own cannot help your students to learn any better, any faster, any harder, but that with him, your students have a fighting chance. So to close, anyone can act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with their God. I chose to do it in a public school. I now choose to do it here. I don't always get it right. None of us get it right all the time. But it's choosing to allow the Lord to grow us and use us where we are. It's not always easy, but this is where faith intersects with vocation. It's allowing the Lord to shine through us as we seek to love him. So how can you act justly and do what's right in God's sight? How can you love mercy? Love it, not just like it. How can you walk humbly with your God and make him look good? How can you do that today? How can you do that in your chosen profession? Let's pray.